Those are my two languages. I work in Russian and also mostly in Chinese. If you want to, I'll speak a little bit more about who I am. I'm mostly a Chinese specialist. And it's my first time to Seoul, first time to Korea. And I just want to say I'm so excited to be here. And I'm just really thrilled. And let me thank Lonnie and the team at North Korea Review. And as I told them before, I think they're doing just absolutely incredibly important work. I mean, I hope you guys get to sleep some, because I think the whole world is watching the North Korea Review. It should be. So keep up the great work, Lonnie and all. Let me just say, I wish I had Korean as well as Chinese and Russian. I've just come from Vladivostok, actually, and before being in Vladivostok, I was in northeast China for a while, both in Shenyang and in Changchun. And you can guess what we were discussing, these issues. So part of my discussion here will be kind of a report out to you about some of what we learned on this journey. But I will also share with you some insights from my the research I've been doing over the last few years, mostly in Chinese sources, about the Korean issue, because I think China is a key player. And as you may see from the picture of Presidents Putin and Xi, that I do feel that this is a critical part of the solution there. So let me move forward here, and spend quite a bit of time laying out what I see as sort of Chinese and Russian perspectives. That is my value added. How do I help a little bit in this crisis situation? But then I'm going to spend at least a few minutes elaborating on a few proposals that I've made for how we could mitigate the current crisis, which is so very dangerous. And I know that's felt nowhere more acutely than in this wonderful city. So I want to say as I begin here that I'm somebody who, again, I'm a China specialist. That's how I was trained. I also lived in Russia for a while, but I think I'm encouraging really, we all need to work together on this question. So I'm trying to push a lot of China specialists to kind of put aside what they're working on, let's say, and help, right? Because we need to get the situation better. So you can see I was very proud to publish a piece in North Korea Review, and that kind of sparked this event a little bit. I'll be elaborating a little bit on some discussion I made in that piece. You can see generally where I want to go. I did publish this book, and I'm not advertising for the book, but it's I don't see a dime. I'm a government official actually, so we're not allowed to make any money on books or anything. But you might look at the book. I try to conceptualize. It came out a couple of years ago. I really try to conceptualize a way in which the U.S. and China can work together to manage global security. And you'll see in there I have these 10 spirals. And these spirals are kind of incremental steps toward compromise. And guess what? One of the chapters is on the Korean Peninsula, and I think it's one of the most important chapters. But the other chapters, could interest you as well. And there's one on climate change, which is not a small issue, and of huge importance. I know people here are breathing a lot of Chinese pollution and all kinds of pollution, but I know people here are concerned. Lonnie will tell you I took the subway here, public transit, and I take it to work every day. I'm a committed environmentalist, and after the Korean Peninsula, let's talk about climate change, because these are grave issues and ones that the U.S. and China need to work together. And I've always felt South Korea is this amazing bridge, really, between the U.S. and Korea. Can help us understand each other, bridge these differences, and help to create a better world. But there's, some chapters in this book you might not expect. There's an entire chapter there on the Middle East. I think the U.S. and China need to work together in the Middle East. And I propose some practical steps there, including on the volatile Iran issue, which of course has some echoes with the Korean issue. But let me push forward. I'll share with you a few insights from Chinese and Russian sources. One more point of introduction here is, well, let's go forward. This slide, again, you may wonder, well, who is this guy really? Look, I spend a lot of time working in the Chinese Navy. I work in Naval War College, and I can tell you a lot about different kinds of ships, including all the ones you see on this screen. And China's Navy is building up very rapidly, and we're monitoring that. Of course, I do a lot. You've seen a lot of my writing is focused on that issue. But I am a military analyst, but I'm also very interested in diplomacy, and I think that military solutions need to be a last resort. And one of my messages that I won't beat you guys up here today, but one of the messages that I'm meeting people up in Washington and where I work in Naval War College is that this issue, the South China Sea issue, is really not that important. It's a whole lot less important than the Korean issue. And if we have to prioritize one or the other, I will say let's put a lot of energy into the Korean issue. And I think that, unfortunately, among American strategists, this point has been missed. And in fact, we've been favoring the South China Sea issue for a long time. And I think that's part of the reason we're in the situation we're in. So, one can debate whether one trades off among issues, but just to give a quick example here, for example, when President Obama and President Xi met at Sunnylands a few years ago, one can imagine, well, how much of their time did they spend on various issues? A little bit of time on climate change. I think they achieved some things there, and a little bit of time on the Korean issue. But as I understand it, they spent a good amount of time, and let's say not such friendly times, talking about the South China Sea. And I've always felt that maybe the reprioritization would help to favor the Korean issue as really the preeminent issue in global security. And that's where it should be. So you're gonna see a lot of me in Seoul. I plan to be coming back a lot and exchanging. And really, I'm here to learn, so I want to leave a lot of time for discussion. Okay, let's move along. Like I said, I focus on military strategy, so I spend a lot of time looking at Chinese diagrams like this. The Chinese have become very excited about these, how to put it, these, let's say their strategists will put things on a nice, colorful map for you. You can look at this map and say, well, gosh, those Chinese are very polite. If they choose to attack THAAD, they won't attack THAAD in South Korea. You can see it's actually, in this notional scenario, the THAAD system is located in Japan. But you can see a kind of multi-pronged campaign, military campaign to destroy the THAAD system, which includes some aspects which for people like me are very interesting. For example, you see for example, submarine launched missiles striking the THAAD system and things like that. So, I'm not suggesting this is very authoritative or something, but it is suggestive of the kind of tensions we see over the THAAD system, and we can talk a little bit about that. It won't be the thrust of my remarks, but this is the kind of source material I'm dealing with on a daily basis and helps familiarize me with Chinese thinking about the peninsula and East Asian security. Okay. Right, so I'm just back from Manchuria, and it was an interesting trip. So let me give you a couple of nuggets, although I can't call them golden nuggets. Probably most of this is known here, where people are following this closely. But some things I picked up along the way, I'll just go very quickly through that. Now, you see that red dot in the middle of the screen? That's a little town called Hunchun, right tucked in between where Russia, China, and North Korea meet. So we took the train down there from Changchun, and fascinating trip. And then went up from Hunchun to Vladivostok and had some discussion. So I encourage everybody in this room to make that trip for numerous reasons. But if you want to understand, in my view, the future of Northeast Asia, this is a good idea. And as I understood it, just in my 24 hours in Seoul, this is not places people commonly go here, but why not? It's your neighborhood, so go look at it. One of the most amazing things is this incredible train ride, which is actually called the most scenic in China. But you will see just how much the Chinese have invested in their link down to the border there. But a couple of quick points. In the roughly 3 days we spent in that border area, we saw no soldiers, none. And we're right on the borders. No military vehicles, no weaponry of any kind. I found that extraordinary. We're in the middle of a massive national security crisis in this region, and I didn't see the need for it. So I think that's something happy to report. From Chinese specialists, this concept of riding the waves, that's how China perceived its way forward, from what we could gather. We found no support for an oil embargo. China does not, emphatically does not want to make North Korea into an enemy. Take them at their word there. Some very senior Chinese foreign policy specialists we met with asserted that the world just has to accept the DPRK nuclear status and hope that Kim Jong-un will become more reasonable. We asked everybody we could find in these areas about sanctions, and we came away reasonably convinced that they were being upheld. In fact, we got many examples of where they're going further than as it were, the law would require, which we found quite impressive. But also local interests are certainly, let's say, agitated. Right? They're the people losing money. We could spend the next hour talking about what we learned in Vladivostok, because I think Russia does have a key role in this, and I'll make that case. But Russians seem inclined to follow the Chinese here, and it will support the double freeze. Okay, let me push ahead through some of these sources. I think you're familiar with a lot of these, Fu-Ying statement from Brookings 6 months ago. I think this is probably the most authoritative statement where we went in China, people referenced this document, some in not so happy terms, like many Chinese actually thought this was not, they took issue with parts of this. But if you haven't read this, please, you need to look at it. The best source in English on the Chinese perspective next. We can talk some about that. Okay, so what do I add? I do look around at different things. Often in China you need to look beyond that, as it were, that official document. You go underneath and poke around to see what people are saying. I've actually met Captain Lee here from Chinese Navy, who talks about the THAAD issue, and that this really puts China at a disadvantage. Next. I'm going to go pretty quickly through here because I'm assuming you want to focus more on my proposals than on the platform. Right, here's some Chinese writing. This is all from 2017, folks. Chinese analysis of the ongoing situation. They talk about, what does nuclear war on the peninsula look like? They assume they're, pretty clearly believe that they do have a deliverable warhead. All this is interesting. I might direct you to the quote on the lower right, though, that North Korea, after developing a formidable nuclear arsenal, must also show the resolve to use nuclear weapons. And that, to me, that's a very key point in nuclear strategy. That I did my dissertation on nuclear strategy, so it's kind of old hat for me, but this makes sense. That is, you can't just have nuclear weapons. You have to act like you might use them. That's the only way they have any effectiveness. So, the good news is that explains some of the bombastic rhetoric that's way over the top, but of course it's also, it makes for a very tense situation. Next. All right, well, probably my most comprehensive look at where do Chinese scholars stand is a piece here I published on National Interest a few months ago, which really, it's actually a translation of a Chinese article which attempted to survey and put all these guys on a chart. In fact, I completed the rest of it, so actually I should update this. But more or less, you get 3 camps. You're probably familiar with these since you follow this closely. But we actually met with Shuri and Hong. Would have liked to meet with the rest of these people. And I should report, I didn't get the full access I wanted when I was in China, and would definitely be going back to Changchun in particular to try to, really try to get with the best expertise in China. But if those of you who don't follow Chinese foreign policy closely, you may be impressed by the interesting factoid that Yan Shui-Tong over on the left, who makes the kind of radical argument that China should not sanction North Korea, but in fact should actually cozy up with North Korea and support North Korea. He's at the same university, Tsinghua, as Chu Shulong, who has said that they should cut all ties with North Korea. So I mean, I guess that speaks to academic freedom in China, but it's an interesting kind of fact that at one university you have two foremost scholars of foreign policy strongly advocating for different positions. But that speaks to how intense the debate is in Beijing. Okay, next. A little more on, I happen to find Yan Shui-tong's argument quite interesting, and I think we ought to take it seriously. He is, after all, a big shot at Chinese foreign policy. But we can look at this discussion here over on the right. In particular, I'm fascinated by what he and other Chinese scholars, and probably at least 3 major Chinese scholars have talked about this, what they call Yusan Jianle, which is like an umbrella strategy. And that is, if you unfurl a kind of umbrella over North Korea, that maybe that would cause North Korea to be willing to, if not completely denuclearize, but at least alter its posture. So I'll talk more about that when I come to my proposals, because I probably draw on that line of thinking. But just to share with you a few more insights, and let me turn to the time here, because I don't want to go going too slowly. I'm going to have to rush a little bit. Okay, there was a lot of excitement about the election here. Next. There has been, let's say, let's focus on the lower article there, I'll read Global Times, for example, what does it mean if South Korea and Japan get nukes? Here's a friend of mine at in Beijing, Jin Sanrong. He's on TV every night in China. He says, gosh, if you look at the upper right, he says, this was a few months ago. He said, wouldn't it be great if Donald Trump went and ate hamburgers with Kim Jong-un? I found that, he's not a silly guy. He's an important thinker. So the fact that this is encouraging, because it suggests that there are Chinese who think that negotiation is possible next. I highlight the fact that, I watch a lot of Chinese news. They talk a lot about Russia's activities in the area. And this, to me, opens up another avenue of thinking. Here's a lot of talking about Russia's fleet activities. This seemed to, of course, China takes some comfort knowing it's not the only big power out there that has some, let's say, issues with the current order, let's say. So that's interesting. Here, okay, that's some of the current material. Now let me show you some older material, just so you get a flavor for Chinese assessments, how they've evolved over time. I just remind you that the last war the U.S. and China fought was the Korean War, of course, and this kind of thing is not unusual. I think this is 2016, showing a U.S. fighter being shot down. The Korean War is so embedded in Chinese DNA, Chinese military DNA in particular. We need to keep that in mind. Go ahead, get this one built. Sorry, if you can keep clicking here. Keep going. Xi Jinping, we know who he is. So, it turns out before he was president, he took an interest in the Korean War. This speech in particular I found interesting. It was in one of the anniversary. I happened to be in China during the anniversary of the Korean War, 60th anniversary, and you can gather from these quotes that President Xi's view of the Korean War is quite different than most American assessments. Next. I can send this brief to anybody who wants to look it over. Next. Here, this one builds too, so. Okay, keep going. A lot of Chinese analysts blame the evolution of North Korean weapon on the Iraq War, and the timing is, I think, it does make some sense, right? The Iraq War in 2003 and the first North Korean nuclear test in 2006, so I think it's not crazy. Next. Some major Chinese heavyweights, this is back in 2012, but already one of the leading academics at Beida, Wang Yizhou, saying, China's lame Colossus can't even get its own region in order. So there have been a lot of critiques in China about the policy. Go ahead, next. We'll skip this one in the interest of time here. I'm running a little behind. But this is, I read this journal in particular, by the way, and I was kind of surprised my friends in Vladivostok haven't read this. And to me, this is probably the most important journal, Chinese journal, we should be covering. I assume people here have seen this. It's written in Changchun, and this is where I find their best North Korea thinkers publishing. And here's a 6-character phrase which really encapsulates China's Korea policy better than any other I've seen. So it's in the right corner there, Jian Buguan Buhua. And that I don't think China will depart from that. I think that is the policy. Oh, that's telling me I should start to get to the point. So, like a good academic, I can talk all day. So, all right, you know about this story. You guys know about Korean politics. But although I think China has cozied up with the South a lot, but they, even this article from 2014 suggests that they're not ready to dump the North entirely. Next. They're quite encouraging of Russia's new role after 2014. Next. I think this article is important. It really suggests the possibility of bargaining, of negotiating, of the nuclear weapon as a bargaining chip. This is rather disturbing. We're talking about, in this article, talking about, gosh, just so you Chinese folks know, the North Koreans were bold enough to just take out an American surveillance plane. So, this speaks to the possibility, which I find disturbing, that China might actually learn some lessons from North Korea about kind of pushing around the U.S., which is disturbing. Another article from that Northeast Asia Forum, which I found interesting. This one was advocating strongly. This one was very unusual. It was saying, really, China needs to rebalance. It's been too favorable toward the South and needs to rebalance back toward the North. And really, the subtext here was Xi Jinping needs to meet with Kim Jong-un, which I found it amazing that this kind of article could be published. It goes quite against the grain. Next. All right, well, just to, I won't do a lot of this, but I do look at Russian sources too, and some of the leading specialists have suggested that China and Russia can work in a useful way here, like Alexander Lukin, who I met in Moscow earlier this year. Next. I guess one of the chief Russian voices is Yogi Teller, and I think he comes here quite a bit. I've only met him once. I think he goes to Pyongyang a lot. I think this is precisely the kind of person we should be exchanging a lot with, because he may be the closest thing to almost direct bridge to Kim Jong-un. But I find it amazing that his view is nearly identical to that of China here, which that suggests this coalescing, which I think we need to be very aware of. Next. This is a former ambassador to Seoul talking about how the agreements really have not been serious in the past. We need to get serious about negotiating. We can't assume a collapse. That's, I think, the heart of his critique. Next. Okay, well, finally get around to the point, which is Professor Goldstein does have a few proposals here. And I say this with a lot of humility because I don't, this is, as it were, this is the most wicked hard problem there is. That's the way we speak where I live in New England. It's maybe impossible to solve. Maybe it can't be solved. Maybe it just needs to be mitigated, as people say, or managed. I don't disagree with that, but I also believe that we need to not be satisfied with this kind of current tension. For example, I don't think it's right that we here in Seoul or wherever should live on the brink of war and chaos and massive destruction. I don't think we need to live that way, because there are ways to get around it. These are various Chinese newspapers, but I want to say that, of course, I wouldn't work for the Navy if I didn't believe in deterrence. In that sense, I am. This is obvious to me, and really everybody agrees about this. So, of course, that's the bedrock of our policy and should be going forward. But we need to do better. It can't be all about sticks. There's got to be carrots. And in my view, that's really where a lot of the academics really, people here at Yonsei really can flex their muscles, start to entertain proposals. Let's see a whole raft of proposals coming about. And I don't see that. I don't know why, but I want to see that. And I encourage students here and graduate students in particular to lead us forward. Because as I was speaking beforehand with an interview, it may take a new generation of thinkers, people outside the so-called, I use this term a lot in my writing, but the blob, that was Obama's term for it. Foreign policy establishment tended to focus on certain tools. And I think a lot of it has put us in the predicament we're in. Okay, so look, I believe in deterrence, but I want to focus on carrots mostly next. We can, by and large, if anybody here is interested in military strategy, I'm ready to talk about, what elements that the U.S. Navy brings to the fight. So, I work on that stuff too, of course, but I don't want, to me, we can focus on other things. All right, so what does my spiral look like? And again, in my book, I have 10 of these. So this is just one, but this is the one, of course, we're thinking about today. Okay, so again, now this was in a U.S.-China context I developed this, so you're probably going to say, well, why is this only focused on U.S. and China? But I still fundamentally believe that if the U.S. and China get on the same page, that others will follow, and I'm glad to back that up in the Q&A if you want. But let's walk through step by step here. Let's start with the United States, and really it doesn't matter who starts these spirals. The U.S. and China can study the Korean War together. Why? Because we fought each other. Nobody wanted that war, but it was a disaster for both countries. Horrible results. Having spent the day yesterday at your incredible Korean War Museum, I would suggest let's have the leader of the Shenyang military district and the leader of PACOM, let them walk through the museum together. I think that would be a wonderful start. But it can go more than that, and I've seen a lot of U.S.-China military activities, and most of them are totally symbolic, but I'm advocating for something that's more than symbolic, that really gets to the heart of the matter, which is that the two countries need to avoid and prevent some kind of disaster like we experienced in 1950, right? Frankly, give some substance to military defense. All right, moving ahead. Okay, how can China respond? China can advocate that we take on this four-power patrol in the Yellow Sea, which involves North Korea. So that's kind of throwing a bone to North Korea, right? That's giving them some recognition that yes, they're one of the club. The Yellow Sea has been the cockpit of major tensions. We all know that. But there are things that could be done in the Yellow Sea, whether it's search and rescue or demining, patrol of fishing regulations, and so forth. I mean, there's a lot that can be done to start to build some trust. It could be Coast Guard, it could be Navies, but to me, that's a useful area to start. Now, already Americans will take a deep breath on U.S. My suggestion number 2, which is a kind of symbolic withdrawal of troops. Not symbolic, so it's a very low numbers, but I think we're going to have to dangle some pretty fat carrots, folks, to get Kim Jong-un's attention, and the folks in Beijing too. So in my view, yes, that has to be on the table. But again, it's symbolic. And I'm somebody who thinks that troops, ground troops these days are, how to put it, our contribution is small. After all, the last person to pull U.S. ground troops from the DMZ was no dove. It was, if you remember, it was Donald Rumsfeld, actually. So, and actually positive things have happened during other periods of troop withdrawal. So, I know that's a highly controversial proposition, and many will be against that, but I think, look, if you want something, you have to give something. That's how diplomacy works. And I'm telling you that is a reality. And as long as our position is North Korea should denuclearize and get nothing for it, that's why we're in the situation we're in. So I'm asking that people be more flexible. Now, here's a very it's not intuitive move here on PRC number 2, where I suggest that China reinvigorates its defense relationship, and I think it was just a few months ago that China sort of declared it would have no more mill-to-mill relations with North Korea. So I'm suggesting that China has gone in the wrong direction, and this I'm leaning into this kind of concept of the, remember I mentioned the Yusan Janhoi, the umbrella strategy. There could be a symbolic deployment of Chinese troops into North Korea, actually. And I presented this in China, actually, and they were interested in this proposal, so maybe I'm making a little progress. But this, comes from my bottom line assessment that our problem is that it's not that North Korea is too strong, it's that North Korea is too weak. That we have this kind of vast asymmetry of power in which North Korea is incredibly isolated and has no option to preserve its regime except nuclear weapons. So how do you redress that balance? It has to go further than just some talk about security guarantees. That's not going to cut it. All right, the U.S. can throw a number of more carrots at this. We can send, we can have the all-star NBA basketball team, somebody go to Pyongyang. But here, I suggest we undertake direct negotiations. I don't see a problem with that. Next. We can talk about these. Okay, and here's where I come into the PRC number 3 is a freeze. Now, of course, you know, since then there is a more elaborate proposal, this so-called double freeze, and I'll discuss that in a moment. But a freeze is a natural waypoint, I think, on the way to denuclearization. It may be the best we can hope for, of course, at this point. We can initiate diplomatic relations, as I do with U.S. move number 4. I do believe, in order to make hope that South Korea is comfortable with a situation where China's playing this kind of foremost role, I do think that China should reach out to South Korea to further develop its the trust between them. I think that trust is quite well developed, but I could see, for example, you know, just for example, a uniformed member of the South Korean military, having an institutionalized post in the Shenyang military region to kind of enhance trust. That kind of thing would help to create these cross-cutting cleavages, that's what we say in political science, to help stabilize the situation during all this change. At that point, I think we take the biggest step here. And maybe this is the only one that matters. But I am proposing that U.S. troops could leave, not completely, but most of them could probably leave without fundamentally altering the security structure here. I mean, partly I guess I say this as a Navy guy who thinks that a lot of what we bring to the fight are air and naval forces anyway. So that this could be done, it could would have a large symbolic value. I realize a lot of South Koreans would be very uncomfortable with this, but I think it could be done. You have to throw some, you have to make this a something desirable. You basically got to throw a big bone at Kim Jong. Okay, I mean, I'm a scholar, but I'll say it in a very crude way. The guy is not going to. So North Korea has to be substantially better off at the end of this process than it is at the beginning, or else you get no deal. Okay? That's how diplomacy works. You give to get. Okay? Nobody wants to give, right? Does North Korea want to give up its nuclear weapons? So this is the reality, folks. And that is how we move to complete and verifiable disarmament. Now, I have one more little twist I'll put on this, and I hope I'm not going on too long. A lot of you pull out the hook whenever you're ready. I've got about 5 more minutes. Is that okay? Okay. Another innovation I would propose here, and I guess if you will, my major innovations here are that China, this umbrella idea, I think we need to pursue that, and that China should lead forward. But I don't think that North Korea will accept the IAEA monitors coming in kind of Iraq style or Iran style. I don't think they're going to go there. So what I'm suggesting instead is that we trust China to handle it. Okay, China has the capabilities, they have all the requisite expertise. If we want, we can add some Russians too. China has every incentive in the world to do this well. Okay, and that should help the situation substantially. So that's another, I think, innovative aspect of this proposal. Okay, let's push forward. Now, what about Russia? At some level, who cares about Russia? They don't seem to be a big player. They're so involved in Syria and Ukraine and seem to be doing, from the Western point of view, dastardly deeds. So why the heck should we welcome them into this situation? I don't agree. I think Russia has a major role here, maybe even the most important role. Why? Because we know that in the words of a Chinese scholar I just met with, he's quite a significant Chinese scholar, he said, North Korea hates China. And then he said they should hate China. I was kind of shocked that he took that extra step. Okay, well, I don't think they hate Russia. Russia is probably among all the powers the most trusted in Pyongyang. That's important. Okay? They are the bridge. Okay? Now, can they pull it off? Do they want to pull it off? We had some discussions in Vladivostok. Many of the Russians are hesitant too. I mean, they really honestly say, look, only Putin himself could really have the energy and the authority to do this, and he frankly is just too busy. But I don't think it's crazy. We're not completely crazy. Look at point number 5. Russia has significant antagonism with the U.S. and is willing to challenge it with regularity. And after that, Russia is willing to take risks to protect allies like Syria. I mean, they're willing to, how to put it, dance with the devil, or however you want to put it. What I'm saying is that could all be quite beneficial. I'll spell this out just a little more, but come to the bottom line, Russia could, I emphasize, be incentivized to act, right? If they're, again, my concept of diplomacy is you give to get. Why should Russia care? And the truth is, honestly, they don't really care. They don't have a major interest in this. Sure, they don't want to see a nuclear war next door, but they're not overly concerned. But they could be incentivized to act. And they have, I think, the requisite ability. And I will say, as somebody who watched a lot of diplomacy, including in Syria and so forth, I was just in Moscow. I'm going back in April. I mean, I'm going a lot to Russia. But if sanctions were on the table, I think Russia would act. And I think they have the ability. You know, look at what Lavrov has done in the last 6 months in Syria. It's actually pretty impressive. Next. Okay. Well, I won't spend any time really on the top because you can make your own. You're all North Korea experts. I think you probably know better than me. You know, would they ever agree? I don't. But we need to try. And let me just finish up on this point. And here, I promise I'm winding up. This is the last slide. I think we should talk double freeze. We have spent a lot of time when I was in Shenyang and so forth talking about double freeze in Russia as well. You know, of course I see that there are problems with it, but I don't see enough debate on it. I mean, I'm looking in the Washington Post, New York Times. Those are the two most important American papers. I haven't seen a single author standing up for this. By the way, I have written it, haven't gotten it published in it. So if you can do that, please try. What I'm saying is, there's no debate about it. Why? You know, where does that debate begin? If that's the only proposal on the table, shouldn't we debate it? I think so. Why don't we start here? I think, you know, again, it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. All right. Well, number two is, I haven't really fleshed the idea out so much, but part of the idea is that both the US and China have utterly failed to solve or do anything, frankly, very constructive on the Korean Peninsula. So maybe Japan and Russia take a turn. And here, you know, I'm joking a little bit, but not entirely. I mean, I think Japan has the resources and an interesting skill set, and frankly, I don't think they've done, you know, they've focused so much on the abductees and nothing else. It's been fairly, let's say, I don't think they have made a contribution. I would like them to. They should, you know, look at the history. They should make a contribution on this question. And again, Russia has this unique set of tools, right? Russia is not a big, they don't have the goodies, right? They can't rebuild North Korea, they just can't. But they have one thing that matters a lot to North Korea. They have military strength, and they can provide deterrence. So that brings me to my last point, the umbrellas. I have talked about an umbrella strategy as a way to solve this. But let me flesh that out and say China's umbrella, not effective, right? Not serious. Add another umbrella, a Russian umbrella. So now you've got a Russian and Chinese umbrella together, okay? They work on it together, it's more effective, it's more credible. The North Koreans feel part of a team, okay? They get some prestige benefits. But let me add more prestige benefits, and that are what I call the parade. And this again, you can laugh a little bit, but we all know that these kind of countries love parades. And I don't think anybody loves a parade more than Kim Jong-un. Well, let's give them a parade. And here what I mean is conventional weapon. That is, I believe that North Korea's conventional weaponry is quite weak. I mean, they have some artillery, yes, they have a lot of troops, they have some special forces and some decent submarines, I guess. But really, I believe it's mostly a creaking military that doesn't have gas for their tanks, that is not able to train proficiently, it has very little high-tech weaponry, their air defenses are more or less a joke. What I'm saying is, this country, that is why they're leaning on their nuclear weapons, because they don't have strong conventional weaponry. They cannot stand against South Korea and the United States. So let's give them some conventional toys. Let's let them have that parade. It doesn't mean, you know, we don't give them the most threatening things, but I'm sure Russia and China could arrange for them to have some nice fighter planes to make a nice parade. But I'm saying this for serious because a lot of this is psychological, okay? lot of it is in Kim Jong-un's head. So you have to think, as it were, think like an authoritarian. Okay? Authoritarians like toys, parades,